Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating look at one of the most beloved, comforting legacies of 1990s television. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit sitcom Friends. For decades, this show has been, well, the ultimate pop culture comfort food. We know the characters, we know the jokes, and we absolutely know who we're supposed to root for. Okay, let's dive into this, because what happens when we pull back the laugh track? What if the real villain of Friends wasn't one of the obvious toxic exes, or the terrible bosses, or, even Janice and that infamous laugh? What if it was actually Ross Geller? Now, I want to challenge you today to try something a little difficult. Stop watching the show as a lighthearted sitcom, just for a few minutes, and start critically analyzing Ross's actions, one by one. Because when you do, something kind of strange happens. Suddenly, the lovable dinosaur nerd starts looking a whole lot more manipulative, jealous, and honestly emotionally destructive than we ever remembered. For years, Ross was presented perfectly through what we can call the nice guy illusion. The widely accepted consensus was basically that Ross was the safe, grounded, slightly awkward, and highly sensitive guy, right? He was the intellectual, hopelessly in love with Rachel Green, and when you put him right next to Joey's blatant immaturity or Chandler's constant deflection through sarcasm, well, Ross seems like the stable one. But if you rewatch the series with a focused lens, that illusion starts cracking almost immediately. Because Ross doesn't just make normal mistakes, he repeatedly hurts the people around him, and then somehow he always manages to play the victim. Let's move to and see how this builds. Nowhere is this clearer than in his central romance. On one hand, we're totally sold this ultimate love story. The shy guy finally gets the girl he's been dreaming about since high school. It's framed as romantic, sweet, and genuinely iconic television history. But in reality, that sweet high school crush story immediately morphs into deep-seated insecurity. Almost the exact second they actually start dating, the dynamic becomes something far, far more toxic. When Rachel finally starts building her own career in fashion, which, let's remember, is something she worked incredibly hard for, Ross doesn't support her growth. He actually resents it. He gets instantly jealous of her coworker Mark, even though Rachel repeatedly assures him absolutely nothing is going on. And instead of trusting her, Ross spirals into severe possessiveness. I mean, he overwhelms her by sending these extravagant gifts to her office, physically interrupting her while she's trying to work, and demanding her undivided attention during literally some of the biggest professional milestones of her life. And this spiraling leads to, honestly, perhaps the most infamous argument in television history. When Rachel, who is completely exhausted by his behavior at her job, asks for a little space after a massive fight, Ross's immediate reaction isn't to take a step back and reflect. No way. Instead, he goes out and sleeps with someone else that very same night. Now, the debate over whether they were technically on a break still divides fans to this day. But getting caught up in that technicality, that completely misses the point. Because the real issue here isn't the technicality of the break at all. It's the stark difference between defending and reflecting. Even if Ross was technically single for a few hours, emotionally, his actions utterly devastated Rachel. And instead of taking full responsibility for breaking her heart, Ross spends the next several years obsessively defending himself. It's like he's a lawyer arguing a court case. He isn't apologizing, he isn't doing any internal reflection, he's just defending. And as our sources point out, villains rarely think they're villains. They justify themselves. And Ross does this constantly. And this toxic pattern, it isn't just isolated to his romantic life. If we broaden the scope to his interactions with his friends, we see a chronic, obsessive need to be right. He completely weaponizes his intelligence to win any argument. Like when Phoebe challenges his beliefs on evolution, he can't just politely disagree. He becomes deeply offended that someone dares to view the world differently. When his sister Monica starts excelling, he slips right into competitiveness instead of offering, brotherly support. And with Chandler, who is far more emotionally supportive than Ross ever is, Ross is often weirdly judgmental. He expects emotional privileges from his friends that he absolutely refuses to extend back to them. So, what does this all mean? Well, understanding the psychology driving all of this is absolutely crucial. The root issue isn't just that Ross is arrogant. The deeper issue is control. Ross has a profound underlying need for control over the people around him and the environment he exists in. It's like his emotional anchor. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what happens when that control is threatened. Ross fundamentally panics whenever the people around him grow in ways he just can't manage. Rachel becoming an independent career woman? Massive threat to him. His son Ben bonding with his ex-wife Carol and her partner Susan frightens him.
Even Joey dating Rachel years later is perceived as a huge threat, completely ignoring the fact that Ross himself had moved on and dated multiple women in the meantime. He reacts incredibly poorly the literal moment anyone evolves beyond his sphere of influence.
Now, to be fair, we do have to acknowledge where some of this stems from. Ross's marriage to Carol ending the way it did was genuinely painful. Carol realizing she was gay shattered his entire vision of his future overnight. The show wants us to sympathize with him, and we absolutely should. However, over time, Ross begins to use that trauma as emotional armor. His profound insecurities suddenly become convenient excuses. His blatant jealousy is framed as understandable, and his controlling behavior, it gets completely rebranded as romantic devotion. Which brings us to a massive question. If a friend in real life acted this possessive, jealous, and controlling, we would probably advise their partner to run for the hills, right? So why did we, as viewers, give Ross Geller a free pass for an entire decade?
Well, the answer lies in what we can call sitcom camouflage. The audience laughs, and we forgive him because the show is just so incredibly funny, largely thanks to David Schwimmer's unbelievable comedic performance. I mean, Ross's breakdowns are legendary pieces of sitcom comedy. Think about them. Squeezing into the shrinking leather pants, the blindingly white teeth, the disastrous spray tan, and of course, screaming pivot while trying to move a couch. Ross is undeniably hilarious. But that comedy acts as a brilliant disguise, masking behavior that without the laugh track would feel highly damaging and deeply uncomfortable in real life.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the fascinating meta-narrative twist here. The writers secretly knew exactly what they were doing. While the show frames him as the romantic lead, it also constantly punishes Ross for his inherent flaws. His marriages fail repeatedly, his deep insecurities humiliate him over and over again, his desperate need for control almost always backfires spectacularly. It's almost as if the show itself understands that Ross is his own worst enemy. Even his career choice is a brilliant, subtle metaphor. Think about it. Paleontology is the study of extinct creatures. Ross literally studies the past. And emotionally, that is exactly where he lives. He studies things that are dead and gone because he deeply struggles to let go. He struggles to evolve, and he struggles to accept change in his life. Unless, of course, it happens strictly on his own terms. And the ultimate proof of this is found by contrasting his journey with Rachel's. Rachel completely evolves over the course of the series. She starts out as a dependent, directionless, slightly spoiled runaway bride. But by the finale, she is transformed into an independent, successful, confident, and emotionally mature woman. Ross, on the other hand, well, he changes much, much slower. He remains trapped in his old patterns of jealousy and possessiveness right up until the very end. This is exactly why the conversation around Ross has shifted so dramatically over the years. Back in the 1990s, audiences really romanticized the jealous, possessive intellectual. The culture framed him as the guy who simply cares too much, kind of confusing being smart with being emotionally mature. But modern audiences viewing the series today, they immediately spot these toxic, messy, emotional patterns. We now recognize that a possessive boyfriend isn't necessarily passionate, he's just controlling.
But let's bring this all together. Calling Ross a pure villain is probably a bit too extreme. Real villains hurt people deliberately and with malice. Ross isn't evil, he's just incredibly believable. He isn't a cartoon villain. He's a highly realistic depiction of a flawed, insecure, really emotional human being who is terrified of abandonment and desperate to be loved. He hurts people, yes, but he does it without fully realizing the damage he's causing. And honestly, that kind of messy humanity is far more interesting to analyze than a traditional bad guy.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. For years, the show conditioned us to root for Ross and Rachel to end up together no matter what. But ask yourself, honestly, was Rachel's life actually calmer whenever Ross wasn't involved? It's a question that completely changes how you view the entire series. If this explainer changed your perspective, make sure you stick around for our next one, where we'll dive into the fascinating psychology of why Rachel and Joey actually might have made way more sense together than Ross and Rachel ever did. Thanks for learning with me today.